Today, we're unpacking an absolutely fascinating topic. We're diving into Harvard Business School professor Deepak Malhotra's masterwork, Negotiating the Impossible. Look, if you've ever felt backed into a corner in a negotiation, assuming you just needed more money or more muscle to win, this explainer is going to completely change how you operate. We're going to learn exactly how to break deadlocks and resolve incredibly ugly conflicts using pure strategic architecture. No magic tricks, no pulling rabbits out of hats, just tactical framing and human psychology.
So put yourself in the hot seat for a second. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where the odds were stacked entirely against you? Imagine a scenario where you literally have zero leverage. You have no extra budget to throw at the problem, no authority to enforce your will, and the person sitting right across the table from you seems to hold every single one of the cards. It's a terrifying, sweat-inducing place to be, right? I mean, most of us naturally assume that when we run out of resources, well, we've simply run out of options. We think it's just time to pack up and go home. Okay, let's dive into this and completely dismantle that defeatist mindset. The old belief is that negotiation is just a game of power, money, and brute force. It assumes if you don't have those three things, you have to capitulate and take whatever scraps you're offered. But the reality? The reality is that negotiation is actually an exercise in psychological architecture and strategic problem solving. It turns out, impossible negotiations require human levers, not financial muscle. You don't need a bigger stick. You just need a better blueprint. Here's our roadmap for today. We'll start by exposing the myth of leverage. Then we'll unpack the three fundamental pillars of negotiation: framing, process design, and strategic empathy. And finally, we'll bring it all together to show you exactly how to break impossible deadlocks. Let's start with our first major paradigm shift: the myth of leverage, and why power is really just a psychological perception. Before we even talk about strategy, we have to recognize that real negotiation is a continuous process. It isn't just that formal haggling that happens around a fancy mahogany conference table. It's how you maneuver every single interaction leading up to that exact moment. Deepak Malhotra hits us with an incredible paradigm shift right out of the gate. He says, power in negotiation is not a fixed physical law like gravity. Power is a psychological perception. So what does that fundamentally mean for you? It means leverage is only as real as the other party believes it to be. Your strength is only relevant if it's applied to things the other side actually cares about. So if you lack conventional leverage, like cash or positional authority, your success depends entirely on how you maneuver strategically behind the scenes. You have to stop focusing on the resources you lack and start focusing on how the situation itself is structured. And that brings us to our first core lever, Pillar 1, framing, because controlling the narrative is absolutely your strongest weapon. Framing is basically the lens through which a situation, an offer, or a conflict is viewed and interpreted by the participants. Imagine you're looking at a massive, intricate painting, but you're looking at it through a really small wooden frame. That frame determines what you see and what remains hidden. If you place the frame over a dark, stormy corner of the canvas, well, that's your entire reality. But if you move that wooden frame just 2 inches to the left to reveal a bright, clear sky, the entire picture you see changes, even though the canvas itself remained exactly the same. In negotiation, framing does the exact same thing to the human brain. It dictates how your opponent evaluates your proposal and interprets your motives. Let's look at a classic behavioral economics principle in action here. If you present an offer highlighting what the other party stands to gain, they usually evaluate it rationally and cautiously. They take their time. But if you frame that exact same offer by highlighting what they stand to lose if they walk away, no joke, their risk tolerance spikes and their urgency increases dramatically. We are literally hardwired to avoid losses at all costs. When you consciously control this frame, you control the conversation. You get to define what's considered fair, what's considered risky, and what requires immediate action. But you know what happens when the other side starts with an aggressive, toxic frame? Here is the insider secret. You don't fight them inside their frame. You reframe. Think of it like verbal judo. Reframing is redirecting aggressive demands toward a constructive, problem-solving narrative. For instance, if an opponent slams their fist on the table and says, "Your price is absurd," defending your price just keeps you trapped in a defensive battle over numbers. Instead, reframe it. Validate their budget constraints, then quietly change the subject by expanding the scope. Shift the focus to adjusting the delivery timeline or maybe the payment terms. You smoothly step out of a standoff and invite them into collaborative problem-solving. Moving on to the most underappreciated element of deal-making, Pillar 2, process design.
This is all about negotiating how to negotiate. In really difficult negotiations, process actually dictates substance.
Listen, before you ever talk about dollars, deliverables, or deadlines, you must negotiate the rules of engagement. There are 3 crucial steps to establish first. Step 1, define the scope and agenda so you can intentionally address the easy issues early and build some trust. Step 2, establish decision criteria and authority. You need to find out who actually needs to be in the room for a decision to be final, so you don't waste 3 weeks giving brilliant pitches to someone who actually has absolutely no power to sign off. And step 3, set confidentiality protocols to prevent leaks. Agreeing on this process first builds incredible positive momentum, and it subtly communicates immense competence and control to the other side.
Now, within process design, you also have to master sequencing, which is the strategic art of who you talk to and exactly when you talk to them. To master sequencing, imagine a 3-week rollout. In week 1, you don't go charging into the office of your biggest critics. You start quietly. You meet sympathetic stakeholders to gather insights. In week 2, you use those insights to build a strong coalition and refine your proposal to address potential objections. By week 3, you finally approach the powerful or hostile players, but now you aren't a lone wolf. You have unified backing. If you mess up this sequence and approach hostile players on day 1, they're going to rally opposition and kill your proposal before it even gains traction. Sequencing naturally builds right into pacing. You have to avoid 2 really dangerous extremes when you're controlling the rhythm of a deal. On one hand, artificial urgency and tight deadlines might force decisions, but they often backfire big time by causing panic, defensiveness, and completely irrational walkaways. But on the flip side, moving too slowly allows momentum to stall, competitors to swoop in, and enthusiasm to cool down completely. You have to actively control the rhythm, knowing exactly when to slow down to let emotional tempers cool off, and when to accelerate to capitalize on a sudden breakthrough. Well, that's how you maximize clarity and minimize panic. That brings us to our final core lever, Pillar 3, strategic empathy. And we need to immediately break a popular misconception here. Empathy, in the context of high-stakes negotiation, does not equal soft sympathy, kindness, or giving in. So, the crucial point is this. Strategic empathy is the intellectual capability to accurately comprehend how the world looks from another person's perspective. Honestly, it's your ultimate intelligence gathering tool. When an opponent makes ridiculous demands, it is incredibly easy to just write them off as crazy or malicious. But people rarely believe they're acting irrationally in their own minds. Empathy allows you to discover the hidden internal logic driving their behavior. And when you unlock that, you find the exact keys needed to alter their decisions. To practice deep empathy, you must look for 3 hidden constraints, because your counterpart is likely operating under intense pressures you can't easily see. First up, organizational or political constraints. They might actually love your deal behind closed doors, but if saying yes risks their job security because it makes them look weak to their boss or their shareholders, they're going to fight you to the bitter end. Second, informational constraints. They might be acting on bad data or false rumors, genuinely believing you want to destroy their business. And third, psychological constraints. Just think of a boss who publicly rejected an idea of yours last year. Their ego won't let them accept it now unless you give them a graceful exit. When you uncover these hidden constraints, your role brilliantly shifts from defeating an opponent to helping them solve their own internal pressures. You dismantle their reasons to say no by giving them a way to say yes and still save face. Now we reach the absolute climax of this explainer. What do you do when you've applied brilliant framing, flawless process, and deep empathy, but talks still completely break down? How do you navigate this final boss battle and break a truly impossible deadlock? First, you have to remember this golden rule. A deadlock is not the end of a negotiation. It's simply a phase within it. Deadlocks just happen when the current approach has exhausted its potential. Do not panic. And whatever you do, do not start throwing out desperate, unreciprocated concessions just to keep the conversation alive. Instead, you need to change a structural variable. Reevaluate the framing. For example, if 2 partners are hopelessly deadlocked over equity percentages, maybe the underlying need isn't actually money but recognition. You can design alternative mechanisms like milestone bonuses or title changes to satisfy that need without destroying the core deal. Or if things are just way too heated, simply introduce a structured cooling off period to clear the emotional air. But what if the deadlock is caused by genuinely toxic opponents who rely on dirty tactics? Reacting by getting angry, defensive, or mirroring their aggression is exactly what they want. It throws you off balance and pulls you right into the mud with them. The strategic response is entirely different. You calmly label the behavior and explicitly shift back to the process.
If they throw out arbitrary threats, start banging their fists on the table, or issue childish ultimatums, you objectively describe the behavior out loud, explain neutrally why it prevents a sound decision, and propose a realistic schedule to resume talks when they're ready to actually be productive. You neutralize their toxic tactics through absolute procedural control. And what if they're just outright dishonest? Enter the contingent contract. This is an agreement where outcomes and payments depend entirely on future verifiable events actually being achieved. This is an absolute silver bullet solution for bad actors. If they make wild, exaggerated claims about what their software can do or the sales they can guarantee, you don't need to get into a fight or call them a liar. You just structure the contract so payment is tied directly to those metrics actually being met. If they deliver on their big promises, great, they get paid. If they were bluffing, you're entirely financially protected. It completely aligns incentives and neutralizes deceit without ever requiring blind trust.
So let's look at your ultimate diagnostic blueprint. When you face an impossible situation and you feel totally outgunned, don't despair, just run through these 3 steps. 1. Examine the frame. Change the reference point and anchor the discussion on a clear, constructive principle rather than just yelling demands. 2. Examine the process. Redesign the interaction. Fix your sequencing so you're actually talking to the right people and control the pacing. 3. Apply deep empathy. Figure out their hidden constraints and help solve their internal challenges so saying yes to you becomes the most logical, honorable choice for them to make.
At the end of the day, negotiation isn't about tricking people or overpowering them. It's the art of creating pathways to agreement where absolutely none existed before. So I'll leave you with this provocative thought. The next time you face a rigged game, will you surrender to a lack of leverage, or will you use psychological architecture to rewrite the rules entirely? The choice and the strategy is now in your hands. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I hope you feel fully empowered to tackle your next high-stakes conversation.